Folks, thanks for coming. So I'm Derrick Willard, and I know some of you at this meeting, but I had a fun career in IT. I retired actually 8 years ago this fall from Sprint as a project manager, and so I spent a lot of time on this campus, not so much time in this building, but many of the buildings around town that Sprint utilized. Working for with got a chance to do some of the big messy projects. So a complete redo of Sprint.com, some work for the federal government. And then at the end, I was involved in a partnership that we had with a company out of Europe. And through that, met a guy that lives in Prague, and he's actually been back over to visit in retirement. And I rode the Katy Trail. I'll say one thing about Jan was that all the way across Missouri on the Katy Trail, bike riding, Jan was going, fantastic. But it was a great place to meet a lot of people and so on, and finish up my career. And as you can imagine, as you come to the end of your career and are contemplating retirement, the question is, okay, now what? What's the model that I've got in mind for what's next? What should I be doing with retirement? A lot of folks look at retirement as a place to enjoy the fruits of your labor and kick back and so on. And I wanted to do something different, but the idea just kicked me back. Just didn't really appeal to me a whole lot. So what I want to talk about tonight is just kind of this idea of when God taps you on the shoulder. One of my favorite hymns is "Come Thou Font of Every Blessing." So if you're in a church where you do hymns, I know we've got to move away from that, but that particular one has just resonated well for me. It's something I once sung at my funeral. One of the verses that really has been impactful is this idea of "Here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come." Anyone want to take a guess as to what an Ebenezer is? What are they referring to? What's that? Yeah, it's a pile of stones. And you remember, oftentimes in the Old Testament accounts, something miraculous will happen or amazing. God was present, something happened, and to remember that event, both for themselves and for their children, they erect this pile of stones. And so the question I have for you is, as you think back over your life to date, and maybe you're just starting your career, maybe you're more on the tail end of your career. What are those piles of stones that where God showed up, did something miraculous that you believe would not have happened apart from God, that you look back at and it allows you to be thankful and also provides, I think, some direction. So I'd like this to be a little interactive. I guess the question is, do you have any sense, just kind of a show of hands, that there are some piles of stones in your life to where you've seen God show up and do something that was unaccountable? Okay. Anyone care to share a couple of those?
Everyone's looking at me, so I guess I get a share. So I'll go with my most recent one. In November 2022, I was let go from a job that I'd been at for almost 3 years. As part of 10% of the company was let go, and which was the beginning of that being a very common thing. And I spent the next 18 months looking for a full-time job, but through it, God provided in a lot of wild and crazy different ways. There was always money. Mortgage got paid one way or another. There was food on the table, clothes on kids' back. There's a lot of things we didn't have that we wanted, but we didn't lack anything that we needed. God provided what we needed, and so and they provided a great job, and we didn't have to leave Kansas City. that's another story.
Yeah, thanks. What else want to share a Palestine?
I was working at Sprint for 23 years and getting pretty burned out on corporate America, especially in that environment as Sprint was towards in the mid-teens and late teens. And I kept telling my husband I wanted to go back to teaching because I had taught when I was doing my graduate work and stuff. And I said, I want to go back to teaching. But I just, when you're working 50, 60 hours a week, I'm fine. Find a new job, you got a job. And I got laid off and came back from, after 2 weeks of coping with that being laid off, came back and started looking, and MNU had American Nazarene University, just a mile down the road from me, had a position open for a computer science professor. I would have never found it had I not been laid off. And they were getting ready to pull the position and not restart the computer science program. So had I not been laid off, I would have applied. And now, 7 years later, I've restarted their program. I've got 20-some students, and I've graduated over a dozen. So, yeah, and the position was out there posted for 9 months, and I didn't see it because I didn't have time to see it. So God did it, so I didn't have time.
Nice, thanks, Chris. Anyone else want to share? We'll be looking for these piles of stones because God will produce those. I guess I want to ask the question though: are these truly God events, or is it just simply good luck, or serendipity, or whatever you might want to call it? What makes those moments something beyond just good luck?
We could go into a long theology discussion here. For me, there were 2 aspects. One was the job hunt was bathed in prayer, not just by me, but by others. And even though like a season across the country where there weren't lots of jobs, there were still people starting new jobs. And so so seeing it as something that God provided was at least a little bit of a belief that was the answer to the prayer and God's timing, not mine. The other was the timing of it. About 5 months before that job offer, I stopped just applying to everything and waited for the ones that actually felt like jobs that I was interested in and had a connection to. So it was very much putting my faith not in anything I could do, but waiting for the right position to open. And the timing of it comes down to another story.
Yeah, that's a great connection.
I just the amount I for the last year or so before I was laid off, and I kept telling my husband and my sister, who I talked to the most, and just tell them I just felt like I needed to give back. Like when I first started with Sprint, I worked in their fraud department, and I was stopping fraud, and I thought it was stopping people from doing things they shouldn't be doing. And I felt like I was doing something, but then by the end of it, I was just like, I'm saving money for a corporation who doesn't care about people. So I didn't feel that, even though I was still in fraud, I didn't feel that connection. I'm like, I want to do something that helps people and that connects with people and that makes a difference in people's lives, which sometimes in the tech industry feels like it's very hard to find. And I just kept praying about wanting to figure out something. And then it just all seemed to fall into place.
One of the things,
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
that I think is probably in common with the Ebenezer story, as well as the 2 stories we heard, was the idea that there was something outside of human controls that God was in. And that's what I think is so cool about the Ebenezer story is they built the stone monument in the middle of the Jordan River so that future generations would ask, how did that get there?
Yeah.
And he could tell this really cool story.
Yeah.
It was something supernatural that under normal human conditions just doesn't happen.
Right.
That to me feels like an Ebenezer when God intervenes.
Yeah.
Supernatural.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on some critical elements of the Ebenezer stories, just like running a library. Those are things, and we're told to be thankful in all things, obviously, but these are moments that I think reveal more of God's character, and I think the things you're talking about also they contribute to God's kingdom. And you think about why we're here. That eternal question, why am I here? In retirement, you ask the question, why am I still here? I think that for most of us, we want to be involved in something much bigger than ourselves, and it doesn't preclude the fact that some of the work that you're doing may seem a bit mundane at times, but in the larger scheme of things, I think that most of us would love to be involved in something bigger than ourselves. So just a little bit more of my story. There's a good verse there in Proverbs 16:9. See, it says, "The person's heart plans his way, but the Lord determines his steps." And so the question is where is the intersection of preparing for what I'm going to do, and God showing up and being a part of that? And there's, I don't know, I don't have a cookbook for how that always happens, but when it does happen, I think that's oftentimes when pile stones result. A couple of observations that I've noted kind of over the years, that just as much as connection is at the heart of the gospel, as you connect with individuals and you're living an authentic life, you're helping them to connect to God. In that same sense, that networking is at the core of life, a life of immaculate usefulness. I'm not saying that if you don't network, you can't be useful, but I have observed that making connections with people, and sometimes it seems even a bit random as to why. It's always surprising to me the things that emerge out of that. A number of years before I retired at Sprint, Sprint started up what they call an accelerator. It was an incubator, if you will, for small businesses. And their interest obviously was self-focused for Sprint. Can we encourage businesses that somehow or another are going to benefit the sales of I guess, electrons through the wire or waves through the air? And I jumped in as a volunteer. They opened up a place down at Crossroads. It had very much of a younger feel, vibe to it, which I found fun and stimulating. But it was interesting to see where those connections would take me over time. Eventually, in 2017, around the time I was retiring, I got involved with a new AI initiative back when AI was still kind of a new thing on the block. And we started just learning everything we could about machine learning and developing some models that could do whack and things like the cause, the root of malaria, for instance, things like that. Another verse, Ecclesiastes 4:12, just read that recently in my daily Bible reading, but a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. And this idea of connection, it probably seems obvious, but as we connect, each one of us needs a couple of people that we can lean on. And the question that I was asked is, if the sky were to fall in your life at 3 o'clock in the morning, who are you going to call? And if you can't answer that question, then you're at risk. And we all need the ability to pick up the phone, call somebody, and say, my life just took a turn, and I need to talk to somebody. And then learn to listen to God's still small voice. There's this interesting story about Elijah, and 1 Kings. And Elijah had come through a pretty big moment, where he has this confrontation with these 450 opposing prophets of Baal, of God there. And it's pretty big deal. He comes away from that, gets chased off by the queen, and goes and insults. And while he's doing that, God gets his attention through his still small voice. So the question is are we listening? Are we taking time to listen to what God might have to say to you about the direction of your life, about his purposes for you? And oftentimes that comes in still small voice. So for me, as I began to pursue things like adventures in bicycling, I'm a bicycle addict, and I'll probably ride around 3,500 miles or so this year. And it's oftentimes with other people if I can, because it's amazing the conversations that you have while you're riding on a bicycle. The involvement with the accelerator, Sprint Accelerator, gave me a chance to spend some time with people who want to be entrepreneurs, begin thinking entrepreneurial. The interest in artificial intelligence, which is still there, obviously it's a hot one today. Lots of questions as to where does AI fit into any faith orientation, and is it even something we should be looking at? Now, I think you went to the Dallas conference on AI recently.
Yeah. The Missional AI conference was in April. And if you go to missional.ai, they've got the sessions recordings, and YouTube does the full day worth of session. And yeah, just a really, really interesting time to discuss that question of should we use AI? Thing I like to point is one of the guys talking about the theology of AI and technology in general is at the heart of it, God created AI. So because God created it, like he created everything else in the world, it is good. How we use it, that's where things start to break down. So yeah, it's worth checking out if you have any interest in the area.
I was telling Larry beforehand that recently talked a little bit about a partnership with some of your folks who were at the Church of Nazarene. But recently I had a chance to show them an example of something created with Notebook LM. You've seen that product, it's fascinating. But I fed it some documents that the Church of Nazarene produced on how to study the Bible. It was just a long text document, and it's honestly a bit dry. Reading it. So I fed it into Notebook LM, and basically I trained the LM just on that document. And so the possibility of hallucination coming up with things that just simply aren't true is vastly reduced. What it produced for me was it took about 2 minutes, it produced a 15-minute audio of two talking heads talking about the content of the article. It blew me away. It had synthesized the essence of how to study the Bible from a Nazarene perspective incredibly well. And so I think there's opportunities like this for those of you that are doing coding, having a coding assistant out there that can suggest code can be a huge time saver. I think, Carrie, you're experimenting a little bit with some agent automation to automate some of the more mundane routine things we do as an organization. Interesting to see how that works. Well, one of the things I realized was, as I approached retirement is not for life. I'm not ready to hang up my spurs. And so, about 3 or 4 years ago, just out of the blue, I get a phone call from a buddy of mine, and he sits on a board it's a partnership between the Church of the Nazarene, based here in Kansas City, and the Jesus Film Project. Now, if you're familiar with the Jesus Film, it was a film that was done, actually, in fact, my wife and I were on staff with Campus Crusade back in the late 70s when that film was produced originally. So I lost touch with it. I didn't even realize it was still being shown. Evidently, it's being shown to great effect around the world. They literally will take that thing out to these little villages out in the middle of nowhere, and with a motorcycle, it's set up to provide electricity and everything. And they're literally showing it to hundreds of thousands of people. In fact, I think the number of people who have seen the film now is approaching since over. And so I got a phone call from my migrant buddy saying, "Hey, these folks need some help, and could you meet with them?" Well, he described a little bit about what their situation was, and I said, I don't think I'm really the person to help them. I'm a project manager. I know anything about apps, that kind of stuff. I work with people that are pretty good at that kind of stuff. It also became clear they had no budget, and I couldn't find anybody who was willing to work on a pro bono basis. So I said, I'll meet with them. And here's the problem they kind of laid out for me. So as I said, the film itself was done back in the late 70s. It's been shown. And the Jesus Film Project actually has about 1,800 partners that are showing the film around the world. Of those, the largest of those is the Church of the Nazarene. And there's roughly, as I understand it, about 950 missionaries out in the field that are showing the film on a monthly basis, and that results in as many as 10,000 groups of new believers resulting from seeing the film. So at scale, it's a significant opportunity, and the problem is that these new believers, like any new believer, are needing to be established in their faith, given some Bible lessons and spiritual formation that take place. Obviously, the Church of the Nazarene is interested in establishing churches, and so their hope, I believe, is that some of these groups that eventually mature into the church. So what they had done, they had developed 2 years worth of lessons, 108 lessons delivered weekly, and the lessons were really targeted towards the leaders to give them material they could present. Along with that, then they developed about 150 or more lessons for the leaders themselves to become pastors. And so they've got all this body of material, which is mostly text, some pictures. How to deliver that is the question. And so we began talking about the different possibilities. The material is a mix of text, graphics, Bible references, audio, and ebooks or ebooks to be read. And since all this is happening overseas in lots of different languages, this needed to be some probably an internet app. We'll talk a little bit about the solution that we outlined it with. I don't expect you to be able to read that, but there was some effort on their part to do a design anyways, so the application flow that they did in Figma. So I wish I had something to kind of to start with. The solution we chose was to develop a progressive web app. Anyone know what a progressive web app is?
It's a web app, but you can run it. It runs in the browser,
Right.
but you can just go download it and install it on your phone, just like a regular app.
Right. So as a web app, that means you don't have to go to the App Store or the Play Store. Today, if you have an iPhone or an Android phone. Can you think of any reasons why you wouldn't want to have to go to one of the stores for web app? Security?
It's cheaper.
It's cheaper, yeah. You don't have to, although we're giving it away for free, so. But yeah,
Overhead of download and edit.
right. As a download of loading it.
Maintenance is easy.
Exactly. Guys, I don't have to send a new version of the app.
Every time they update their OS. Ask me how I know that. Yes.
You're not beholden to their terms of service, so they can't,
That's the big one.
they can't decide to just remove your app from the store.
Yeah. So I noted there, John 14:6, anyone remember off the top of their head what John 14:6 says? I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. That's a statement that Jesus makes to his disciples, and it is exclusive in nature. It's hard to get around that he's being exclusive there. The question is it exclusive to the point of becoming a language? And some people might say yes. So just to avoid that whole discussion entirely, we opted to forego, at least at the moment, doing that and use the progressive web app approach. The app stores itself on the device progressively. So as you load content down to your device, if the content is not changed at the server, then your device just simply pulls the content up locally, which has the added advantage that if you're paying for your data, then it reduces the cost there. We wanted, because in some countries this was going into issue of security, we wanted to protect the identity of the people using the app. And so, again, we didn't want to capture any information about the person, so that they're less likely to be noticed. The screens needed to be optimized for mobile devices. And it's amazing, in a place like Africa, for instance, where I'm told, there's not much of a wired infrastructure there. However, there is a very sophisticated mobile network there. In part because if you work, in many cases, that's how you get paid. You get paid on your device. So mobile devices are huge there. In thinking about how to approach this, I decided to do my development with some products that one were free. I was doing this pro bono, and so didn't want to go into debt in retirement. And I decided to use Android Studio for the integrated development environment, and one with a language developed by Google called Dart, using their SDK Flutter. Why would I do that? Why not use there's can anyone think of other tools that I might have used that would give me the ability to develop for potentially more than one type of device?
Could use .NET MAUI, which is the Microsoft ecosystem.
React Native.
Yeah, React Native beats that, obviously. Yeah, there's several tools out there that will allow you to build, if you will, build once and deploy it to many different devices. Again, we wanted to leave the option open at some point. One of the things I liked about this Flutter approach is that I literally can build for the rest of the web app. I can build using the same code. I can build it as an iOS app, Android app. It also supports the desktops for Mac OS, Windows, and Linux. I haven't getting Linux with, but I have successfully built the others. And then there was a bunch of text manipulation that was going to have to be done to compare text. And so Python was kind of the obvious choice there for a lot of that. And I wound up building little Python scripts to take things. For instance, there were tens of thousands of Bible references in these documents. And as you might imagine, what I really wanted was the ability to turn all those Bible references into clickable hyperlinks. Take you out to Bible.com, which is basically the Google version, folks. And I didn't want to have to do that by hand 10,000 times. And so I wrote a little bit on Python to do that.
I'm going to grab it in just a little bit. He had to learn a lot of languages with just perfections. And I'd go down and go, ooh-ah, and I couldn't really think what he was talking about. It's pretty impressive.
Or my wife. Paid more. So let me just give you a real quick look. Some of you have seen this. I brought up just a couple of the versions. So on the left, let's see, we've got Mac OS versions running on Mac. I built it as an iOS app, an Android app as well. Don't have those up front. But as you can see, what you end up with on the middle there is more of the Windows. By that. But it gives you a fairly similar look and feel between the different environments. You can, with this one set of code, you've got the ability to go in and tweak each of the environments. And if you want to, for instance, if you want more of a material look to your Android app, for instance, versus or the iOS approach to things. But I'd say probably 90% of the code is pretty much the same across the board. One of the nice things about Flutter, just as an advertisement, is that it builds the code as essentially as native code. It's rewriting the screen. It's full control over the screen. The other thing I like about it, that others are starting to do too, is the ability that you make changes in your development environment. You can click refresh, and it just refreshes the simulator. By the way, so it's anyone but so the app is pretty simple, but it consists of lessons for new believers. I don't know if you see this or not, but we look, for instance, at the Old Testament lessons there, 53 of those. Look at they'll look something like this. Again, these were designed for the leaders of these groups. So provide some background to the lesson. The hyperlinks open up a separate window and take you over to the Bible.com, which just hit that one. There are pictures that go with that. Again, you're oftentimes you're in a situation where this may be the first time that folks have heard the story, and also may be countercultural to them in terms of what's going on. So having the pictures and photos telling the story. We wanted the ability, as I said, to do lessons for the leaders. So I mentioned how to study the Bible, for instance. So on the Bible Chronicles is how to study the Bible. It's got a series of slides. And we decided to go ahead and produce audios for each of these. So, other guys who works with the church.
How to study the Bible. This Preaching Point Leaders Toolbox module was originally developed by Clergy Development.
Derrick, can you say a little bit about, that's in English, but how many languages have to do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the requirement was to do about initially about 4 or 5 languages. So we did English, and then we followed with the colonial languages. So French, Spanish, Portuguese, and and then we began looking at where the missionaries were. So we picked up a language called Jula, which is spoken in Africa. It's a trade language there. It's really common. Swahili, another language in Africa. We picked up some from the East and Near East. Give an example of when I click on the world there. There's a list of the languages that we're currently supporting. It's like Bengali. Urdu was interesting. That was my first right to left language. So you click on that, everything goes right justified. And fortunately, Flutter handles a lot of that. Sure. So a lesson, something like that, and the links still work. So it opens up a Bible reference in Urdu. Even all of the controls are backwards too. We did recently had a requirement to, because of licensing, to exclude some content for certain locations. So particularly here in the U.S., we didn't have the rights to some of the material, some of the pictures, and some of the audio. And so I'm going out and figuring out where are you when you're connected. And if you're not in the U.S., you get to see everything. If you are, you're certainly show it. But we don't retain any of that information, so there's no place that I store it. That's the app. In terms of real quickly, what's next? One of the things that really struck home with me, probably back to those days with Campus Crusade crew. That's how I met Barb. In fact, she was working in our headquarters in California at the time. And but they really left me with a heart for sharing the gospel and particularly discipling the believers. And I think it's one of those things we think, well, it's kind of like brushing your teeth. We all ought to be doing that, but it really gave us a model, I think, for how that might look. And again, the value of the connection is one of the things I did was I got involved as a volunteer with a local organization called C12. C12 is a group. These are roundtables of Christian business people, and their motto is building great businesses for a greater purpose. And so we look at really the integration of how does faith and what I do for a living, how does that impact the way in which I interact with my employees, with my customers, with my vendors, and so on. And what makes us different than just the next guy. Yeah, so it was out of that as I began praying again. God, in the past, I've had a chance to meet one-on-one with guys and just read through the Bible together on a weekly basis. And out of that, there were a couple guys that started about 3 years ago. We started meeting every week since, and are just working our way through the Bible very slowly, but reading it and just asking, simple questions like, "What's going on here? What do I get? What don't I get?" And so on. And the goal there is that they would become comfortable enough to do the same with somebody else. Kind of 2 Timothy 2:2, if you have that all memorized, the things you've heard in the presence of many witnesses, these trusted faithful men will teach others also. So, yeah, so that's, I think just in terms of passions, that's where I see the opportunity to make a difference, hopefully, in a couple guys' lives now, and then more broadly through the people on their repentance. That's what I've done for you tonight. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer it.
How long did it take you to figure that out?
About 3 years.
Is that your first release after 3 years?
It came out in pieces, but I kind of consider this a 1.0 version about last summer. And we made some updates with either added new languages. Sort of. Yeah, if you think that you're going to take a boot camp class and become a full stack coder, I don't discourage you. I went through that kind of route, self-study, and all. I had not coded since the 90s, and gosh, it's changed. So,
What kind of distribution do you get on the app?
So I'm looking at the web stats. You're talking about
right.
He's using it. So I'm looking at web stats on it, and we're seeing, on a regular basis, probably 300-400 hits a month, and distinct people hitting it. So
it's reaching the global audience,
Yeah, it is. So it's interesting because the web metrics give you it's best guess for location, anyways. People are using VPNs and got that out there. But yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of activity in Africa, which is kind of what we expected. It's more than 2 languages. Yeah, of course, hope there'll be more, but glad that those that are able. Yeah.
Do you see much in the Arabic world, or do you have to build something like that? I couldn't even tell on the list. I could see look like it was like India or something, but then going down your list is different languages you're supporting.
Right. Yeah, so we got, let's see, we got Hindi, and there's Nepali, Urdu, and Bengali, kind of the 4 that would fit in the world thing. Each had some interesting challenges just in terms of trying to recognize the extended character sets.
So when you build it out from the different languages, what tools, resources do you use to actually build the translation in this language or that language and so forth? Is it mostly automated translation tools now, or is it efforts to start something, give it to your users in that language, have them give you feedback, and say?
It's more the latter. So the experience we've had to date, trying to use some of the automated stuff, at least the stuff that's affordable, is that the quality was kind of questionable. I did use Google Translate to take a first whack. One of the things I had to do was to translate all of the text that makes up the app itself, not the content portion of the lessons themselves, but just things like if you have a button that says back or home, what's the Hindi word for that? So I used Google Translate to come up with a list. I would put that into a spreadsheet, and then we would send it to somebody overseas who's fluent in English and that language, and would take a look at it. In some cases, they came back and said, the word close in English can mean close, close the door, and, and so things like that. We just needed some help on because Google Translate wasn't. There are services that will do that kind of stuff for you. If you all have had any experience with those that seem to do a better job.
What's next for this app?
So for this app,
Or for whatever else?
yeah. So the next thing I'd like to do is if you use the Bible.com U version, one of the features they have for you to use is for your daily Bible reading. They have tons of Bible reading plans. I'm working on a chronological reading the Bible this year. The nice thing is that you can do what's called Bible with Friends. And so you can invite a group of your friends to read the Bible with you. And then the nice thing is that it gives you, these are the chapters that you're going to read today. And then at the end of your reading, you have a window where you can type something about what you read. That to me is the cool thing. I mean, it's good to be reading the Bible, but getting into the discipline of saying, okay, God, what are you saying here? Is there anything any message that I'm getting today? Or any questions I've got? The ability to voice that then with a group of people who've been invited into that conversation. So these are known people. It was really great. Well, for some reason, the Bible.com dropped their desktop support. So the only way you can do this is on a mobile device, which I guess I'm old, but I don't know. I don't really like using mobile devices to, my thumbs just don't look at this. I would be better sit on my desktop and type this stuff.
Well, the other thing is, it's like, great, after staring at screens for 16 hours a day for how many decades, it's like, I just don't want to try to live on a small screen.
Yeah.
And then I have to magnify it enough that now the screen is really only half the size that it really would be for a young person. So I agree. I'm like,
I'm with you on that. So
how can I project my Kindle to a to a desktop monitor just so I can.
Yeah. So the other thing this thing does not do is there's no great storage of the information. It's there, but you'd have to know that on January 2nd, I wrote a comment. I don't remember what you did on January 2nd. And so what I really wanted was back to my pile of stones is that I would like to be able to just simply index what I've said and go back and find an observation, whether it's by verse or it's by topic or keyword or whatever, and pull that up, because I believe that some of these observations are going to become a pile of stones where you're going to go, oh, I didn't ever thought about that before, or I need to do something about that. What about prayer requests? That's not in their scope either. So, so that's the app I want to build next. I don't have the rights to a gazillion. They got over 2,000 versions of the Bible out there. I don't have the rights to all that. So can I somehow utilize them? And where would I come up with the Bible reading plans to go with that? Things to figure out, but that's kind of the next thing I want to work on. Well, I think I probably have spent my nickel here, so thank you, everybody.